Welcome back to Can I Has Rework, the spin-off series of my Can I Has Buff series that focuses on warframes rather than weapons. In this episode, I will be going over why I feel Atlas needs a rework, starting from the ground up by describing his powers and why they are good, then explaining why they may or may not need a rework in my opinion. Atlas is one of the few warframes in the game, in my opinion, where all of his powers are viable for most factions. His first ability, Landslide, scales with power range, duration to extend the combo duration, strength for damage, and mods on your melee weapon. This makes it incredibly powerful that sends enemies flying on the final punch, taking them out of the battle momentarily and allowing you to rush over and do a finisher on them if you make it there in time. Atlas cannot be knocked down if he is on the ground, and although he can be pushed away by stuff like Shield Lancer's Shield Bash, he can never be knocked over, increasing his survivability a lot when trying to use his Landslide versus enemies. His second ability, Tectonics, is useful in that it provides a small wall of cover for you, allies, or defense objects, blocking all fire and acting as a physical objects for enemies, which will focus on the tectonic wall when near. It can also be cast again to cause it to turn into a boulder, damaging and stunning enemies as it rolls to where your reticule was when casting. His augment does disable this boulder mode, but does allow you to cast up to 4 of these walls at once, allowing Atlas to tactically place and block off hallways and other enemy spawn points temporarily to provide some relief to his team, as well as simply creating a longer wall to hide behind. Petrify is also useful, which is his third ability, allowing Atlas to cast a beam in front of him that spreads out and immediately stuns enemies in its radius and slowly turns them to stone for a certain duration. Some enemies like Heavy Grenier require a 1 stone rate in order to turn solid, and enemies like the Ancient Disruptor are immune to being turned into stone due to their heavy ability damage and strength reductions, but these enemies can still be stunned in place for a short time even if they are not turned into stone quickly. His augment allows a 50% chance for bonus loot and allowing enemies to turn into stone to be scanned in your codex, which is useful for newer players but serves very little purpose to more experienced players when better loot farming methods are available. Finally, his ultimate ability, Rumblers, causes Atlas to slam the ground and summon 2 giant stone golems that will throw boulders before rushing enemies with powerful punches. They can become incredibly tanky as they scale with power strength and Atlas's armor rating, granting them incredible resistance to damage that rivals all other summonable specters or ally abilities in the game currently. Even better, these Rumblers can only be stunned by impact procs or staggers, and cannot be set on fire, knocked down, electrified, or procced with blast, allowing them to charge in with stunning punches. The augment allows Atlas to create a bigger, slower Rumbler with less combined health but more damage per swing, which punches the ground occasionally to attract nearby enemies' attention to the Rumbler instead of Atlas for a few moments. Now for why Atlas is on my list for a rework. His Petrify and Landslide abilities are perfectly fine in my opinion, as they are both either very powerful or have very good crowd control. Petrify has issues with status chance, however, as enemies turned to stone cannot be procced with status effects like Corrosive, meaning turning heavily armored enemies into stone will prevent removal of armor until the effect wears off. However, this is a reasonable exchange for being able to completely immobilize an enemy for a good duration of time. My first issue with Atlas is not his abilities per se, but his augment mods and his base stats. Being a very large chested warframe, which in fact caused me to take off the right armor slot in order to even see the enemies in front of me, Atlas amazingly only has 450 base armor, 150 less than Valkyr, who is practically naked compared to Atlas. This can be increased to a decent 945 with steel fiber, but even past level 40 enemies, this level of armor just does not suit this warframe in my opinion. To fix this first issue I have with Atlas, I suggest tweaking his Landslide ability a little that will encourage the player to punch enemies to a pulp more often. Now when casting Landslide against enemies, each final punch in the 3-punch combo will add a base 50 armor to Atlas, as long as the final punch directly strikes an enemy. This can stack up to 20 times, granting him up to 1000 bonus armor. Each 50 armor acts as a stack and will deplete after a base 10 seconds, affected by duration, causing his bonus armor to slowly deplete over time if not punching enemies. However, this will cause Atlas to have a very high base 1450 armor without mods, which can then be boosted by armor boosting mods like Steel Fiber, giving him competing armor levels with even Valkyr Prime, but only if he keeps attacking enemies. This way, Atlas can rush into a group of enemies that just downed an ally, punch them all to death, and sit safely with a few extra 100 armor as he stands over the ally to heal them. Like I mentioned, the only other thing I have an issue with is his augments, but more specifically his Titanic Rumbler augment, which is cool and all, but the reduction in total health, the reduction in speed, and the only weak attraction by the single Rumbler's ground pounding makes it actually worse in all cases than just having 2 Rumblers, even down to the attraction as 2 Rumblers aggro just as many enemies as a Titanic Rumbler would. I have already made a suggestion for this augment in my Duck Duck Augment series that showcases some of the worst augments in the game, but I will offer a new suggestion specifically for this video as well. Titanic Rumbler will now have exactly double the status of the 2 normal Rumblers instead of reduced stats, but still move at a slower speed. It will now have a higher threat level that enemies will now prefer over Atlas unless he is closer, as if he was a defense pod or mobile defense target, and will now slam the ground much more often, sending a shockwave through the floor similar to the effect of Banshee's Soundquake. This will cause all enemies within 10 meters of the Rumbler to be knocked down to the ground from the shockwave, and enemies another 10 meters out will suffer an impact proc. This will cause the Titanic Rumbler to be as tanky as it should be, while also using its larger size to create shockwaves every 10 seconds or so to knock down and stun its foes. So that's Atlas, a stone golem that has a disappointingly low armor rating, powerful punches, and augment mods that just make you scratch your head in confusion or accept it with a simple meh. Thanks for watching.